I have often said that I am kind of tired of playing good games and instead really focused my attention on great ones. I think this comes from a overwhelming amount of okay-ish games that have arrived on Game Pass, plus a pretty dense summer launch season. So as I kind of work through my backlog and continue to buy more games and put them on my list, some of them start to fall off the radar. One that I didn't want to fall off the radar was Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origins. And I feel like this game didn't get the love it deserves. And that was one of the big reasons I wanted to play it. Largely because I am a huge Final Fantasy fan. So I am definitely somewhat biased when it comes to Final Fantasy just in general. Because it's a series that's incredibly near and dear to my heart. But also because I think the idea of this game, if executed well, could be cool. So this is my review in progress because I'm about 7 or 8 hours into this experience. You're going to watch some gameplay from one of the early dungeons that I went through. And I've got to say that I feel like the critics largely got this one wrong, which doesn't surprise me. As you probably know if you've watched my channel before, I have really turned away from a lot of critical opinion as of late. I find a lot of the major outlets don't necessarily get it right. I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that they're overwhelmed and that it's hard to find quality workers right now. And as a result, they're just kind of taking what they can get to fill the quota of content. But I've got to admit, a lot of the takes that I have seen on this game, I think are way off base. And I was looking through the Metacritic, and that just kind of validated my thoughts on that. And I wanted to put at least my version of the truth out on the internet for people to see and think about. And because I love Final Fantasy so much, it just kind of made sense to talk about it anyway. So if you're not familiar with the Final Fantasy series, don't worry. This is a different entry point than more mainline Final Fantasies. This is more in the style of Dark Souls light, definitely more in line with Neo, which would make a lot of sense considering who made both games. But it's more of an action combat game with a kind of Final Fantasy wrapper than it is a true bona fide Final Fantasy sweeping, massive RPG narrative. It takes a different look at the events of the original Final Fantasy with the Warriors of Light. Now, go back and look at what the NES version of Final Fantasy was, and I dare you to inject massive amounts of storytelling into a very old Nintendo game. But there is some goodness in there to be had. And I think this game tries to live true to some of that, at least so far. But essentially, it is the age-old, well, now age-old, but back then, honestly, cutting-edge narrative of the crystals. There are these magical crystals, one for each of the 4 elements, the wind, water, earth, fire. And it's up to our heroes to try to kind of save the day, in a sense, and wield these crystals and defeat this evil that is kind of plaguing the land. What makes this story different is it's kind of a joined-in-progress effort, and you are playing with characters who are initially very, very, very dull and very one-noted. You have Jack, who is obsessed with killing chaos, but so is Jed and Ash, but Jack definitely gets a lot more of the screen time because he is your player character. What you come to find very early on, and I will promise there won't be spoilers, 1, because I haven't beat the game, but 2, because that's just not how I am, is these characters have amnesia. They're carrying these stones with them that are crystals, but they're blacked out. And for some reason, if you carry these, you have a burning desire to do something. In this case, defeat chaos. But it's at you get great strength, but at a great loss of personal self, as in the amnesia. And that's where the adventure and the mystery begins. And I really appreciated that it's kind of unknown. And as you play through the game, if you find little lore nodes or little, journal entries, you can start to piece together the story for yourself. I don't really know where it's going quite yet, obviously, but and maybe the payoff is going to suck. I don't know. I'll come back and talk about it at some point in the future, but I like the approach to this game, and I think a lot of critics probably saw that or played that initially and were frustrated because it didn't make sense and it wasn't just kind of handed to you on a silver platter. There's a lot of unknown elements to this story that will be unveiled over time, and I just feel like it didn't get a very good shake. So when you're playing through the game, it is definitely a third-person action combat. I said Dark Souls light because it does have some Dark Souls elements to it, but it's a kind of hack and slash with RPG elements, over the top of it. And what makes it so fun is it's really how you want to play it. The game offers 28 different jobs. Now, a job consists of a special job-specific weapon and a special job-specific ability. You get some unique ability that only that job has, whether it be to charge up your sword and do a lot of damage, or to be able to block, or be able to heal your teammates, whatever it happens to be. You're always going to have that, and that's what really makes the jobs unique. You can have 2 jobs equipped at any time, so you can freely, mid-combo, swap between jobs. You can start off as a swordsman and switch over to a mage, or be a knight and convert to a paladin, or even a dragoon. There's a lot of really cool classes in here that are a great nod to the lineage of Final Fantasy characters and Final Fantasy kind of stereotypes. What makes it so fun is each character has a litany of moves that are triggered by, hitting light attack and heavy attack in combination with some timing and directional inputs from the left analog stick. So you're going to be able to pull off some ridiculous moves, and a lot of those are even customizable. As you work your way down the various job trees, you'll unlock different abilities that allow you to kind of change how your character functions, which in of itself is really fun for combat. Thankfully, there's no stamina system, and although it is at times difficult, the reality is death is not really punished. Everything you've earned up to that point, including experience, rewards, treasure chests, etc., are yours to keep. You just got to go back and fight the enemies through the last checkpoint again, which isn't actually too bad. It's actually very forgiving when you think about it in that regard, and I really appreciated that. What makes this game stand out is not the gear system, which I will talk about in a moment, but it's really this ability that Jack has. On certain attacks, he can essentially absorb and use those enemy attacks to deflect back to an enemy. So you have your traditional evade, where you can just dash out of the way. That's pretty standard in these Soulsborne-esque games. However, this has a parry ability, and if you parry just right, you'll actually absorb the enemy's attack, and then you'll get a couple charges which you can throw back at them. Now, this wildly changes gameplay because you could store these for later. Now, you only can have one at a time, but you don't have to do it right then. You could store it for another encounter, or you can immediately throw it back at an enemy and, do massive damage to them. As an example, early on, you'll fight the bombs. I'm sure you're very familiar with those big floaty fireball things. If a bomb throws a fire at you and you absorb it and launch it back at him, he instantly self-destructs. So there are some cool risk rewards. You can even do this in boss fights too, which is really, really cool. To be able to take a boss's ability and put it back to them. Because boss abilities are going to be like super OP, right? So that is really, really fun. And that works regardless of the class that you have. And it's just a great way to kind of mix up your play style, and a great way to really vary how combat works. And that's what makes it so fun. That's why I feel like this is a great entry point, in a sense, to those kind of Soulsborne games, because it's like a Soulsborne light. So it has a good sense of difficulty, but not too hard, and you know, you're going to be getting some really cool combat mechanics as you unlock the game. The problem is the loot system. This does follow that Neo Team Ninja loot system of just gear just basically dumping out to you. You're going to be overwhelmed with the amount of gear options you have. Now, thankfully, you have to, first of all, you have to equip yourself plus your 2 party members. But thankfully, there is an auto-equip function, which will just basically say, hey, give me the best thing you can. Unfortunately, it doesn't really understand synergies, and it definitely doesn't understand certain abilities being best for certain classes. So if you have a piece of gear that has 2 defense and is best equipped for a mage, and you have a piece of gear that's 1 defense and best equipped for a fighter, and you're playing as a fighter, and you tell the game to automatically equip the best gear for you, well, it's going to equip the mage gear because it's got higher stats, even though the fighter gear may actually be better for you. So there are some good filters in the game that allow you to deconstruct equipment and to salvage different pieces of gear to get upgrade materials, which you can also use to faster progress your job tree. However, if you want to be the best you can be, you're going to have to sit through a lot of menuing to pick the absolute best. Now, I'm playing on the medium difficulty, and I've had absolutely no problem at all blowing through the combat. I mean, there is some challenges, no doubt about it, and I have died my fair share of times. But, and I've just let the game basically auto-equip for me. So it does work. It just might not be as strong as you could possibly be. And I'm sure if you're a true RPG purist, you're going to want to sit through the menus and navigate and find gear and that sort of thing that really makes your combat and character shine. That's my biggest frustration, is I wish there was less, but it was more meaningful. But I understand this is kind of the style of game that this company makes, and I understand it. I'm not a big fan of it, but I acknowledge it. So the last thing I'll say is, you know, the elephant in the room to me is the graphics. Now, it does offer a 60 frame per second mode, which is awesome and is an absolute must, in my opinion, if you're going to play any sort of action combat game. It does offer a 4K 30 frame per second mode. I didn't notice a massive difference in graphical quality between the two, but 60 frames is definitely welcome. The problem is this game struggles with HDR toning, and not to get into an elaborate explanation as to why that's important or what that really means, but ultimately what I find happens a lot is colors are blown and washed out, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as to the rhyme or reason. This does affect draw distance, and this does affect overall tone of the map. I'm supposed to be in this magical cave right now fighting an evil pirate, and there are these wonderful bright neon lights and wonderful bright neon plants that kind of adorn the atmosphere, which look beautiful. But the problem is the game doesn't seem to balance that well, and sometimes the combat is so washed out, it's hard to miss some of the cool stuff. And yes, you're seeing damage numbers fly by, and my 2 teammates are wailing on Bikke, and I'm in there hitting him with all my super attacks and really trying to crush this guy. But there are some amazing animations, particularly on the death animations, where you can basically regain magic by, like, God of War style, absolutely eviscerating enemies, picking them up and ripping them in half. Jack has this unbound rage that comes out, and you get some amazing kill animations. Back-breaking enemies over your, like doing a torture rack. Like, remember Lex Luger? There's a finisher like that, ripping an enemy's arm off and stabbing him through the face with it, breaking people down, and it's awesome. It's really, really awesome, and I love the combat for that. The problem is, because of that graphical issue, sometimes it's hard to kind of make out what's going on. There's a lot going on the screen at times, and the brightness sometimes just feels a little off, and it's kind of difficult to navigate through the gameplay, to be honest. But short of that, I think this game is really, really good. I know I started off this video by talking about good versus great games, but the more I play it, I'm convinced it is a great one. And I don't yet know where the plot is going to take me, and I don't yet know where, ultimately things are going to reside in terms of, power levels and everything. And that's why I said I'll come back at some point and readdress this video. But a first impression, getting tons of gear, changing the way your character looks, sometimes maybe goofier than not. Tons and tons of combat, customization, more than I've seen in really any game in a very long time, with really being able to map out different moves and jobs and absorbing enemy attacks, makes this game a just absolute blast to play. So I do recommend you check this game out. I don't think you should follow the mass criticism of this game being horrible and atrocious and makes no sense, and Jack just runs around as a mindless robot and yells chaos, chaos, chaos. There's definitely a lot more to unpack here, and I'm enjoying going through that. So that wraps up my first thoughts on this game, and I want to hear from you guys in the comments below. Have you played it? What do you think? Is it fun? I want to hear from you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.